Hello, and welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication video with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the 17th text in the 5th chapter, and this actually, stylistically, is very similar to the text we previously encountered in the 16th text in this 5th chapter. It really is stylistically very similar. So let's just get into it. Kol machloket shehi l'shem shemayim sofa litkayem. Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven, it's going to eventually endure. Kol machloket she'eino l'shem shemayim ein sofa litkayem. But every dispute that is not for the sake of heaven, it will not endure. Now, just as we had encountered in the previous text, this sounds really lovely. This sounds very neat. This bifurcation of things that are in the previous one, it was love that was dependent upon something will not endure. Love that is not dependent upon something will endure. Here, it's about things, disputes specifically, arguments, disputes that are not for heavenly purposes. They're not going to endure. But if they are for the sake of heaven, they will endure. Now, it's very abstract. And it's interesting, especially contrasting versus the previous text, where it was talking about love. This is very different. Love and arguments are very different things. Love, you want to continue. So, not having it dependent upon something in particular to make it endure, that's a good thing. But here, we're talking about disagreements, arguments. We want arguments to continue? It sounds, when we think about it, why would we want arguments to endure? Why do we want disagreement to continue? It would almost seem to be the opposite. We would want harmony. We would want peace. We would want people to all be on the same page. But it almost seems as if it's valorizing the continued existence of disagreements, which is really curious. Okay, but we're not done. We've only gone halfway through this text, and just as we had experienced with the previous text in which examples were cited, we're going to get to see examples cited as well, which is helpful because the first half of this text is abstract. What does this mean? When are these disagreements for the sake of heaven or not for the sake of heaven? Well, now we have examples cited for our benefit. Ezehi machloket shehi l'shem shemayim. What are we talking about? What is a disagreement that is for the heaven, for the sake of heaven? Zo machloket Hillel v'Shammai. This is the disagreement, or sort of really a broad set of disagreements between the leading first century figures Hillel and Shammai. Now, also Hillel and Shammai, it's actually, when we really think about it, is really actually quite fascinating because, as it turns out, there are not that many disagreements recorded between Hillel and Shammai in rabbinic literature. In fact, it's a small number. I want to say a handful, could be a little bit more than that, but we're really not talking about that many disagreements, at least recorded between Hillel and Shammai. And as I mentioned, these two figures both were in the early first century of the Common Era, and we had actually encountered them previously in Pirkei Avot, at the end of the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, that they were a set of pairs that had received tradition from another set of pairs before them, and then ultimately they were able to pass it down. I think early in the second chapter, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai received it from them. Now, what's interesting about this, I mentioned this disagreement, that we don't have many recorded between Hillel and Shammai, yet we do have voluminously, it's just strewn about, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of recorded disagreements amongst their students, known as Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. The house or the academy of Hillel and the house or academy of Shammai, they had very strong disagreements against each other in literally hundreds of different topics. And they disagreed and disagreed and disagreed. And yet, what's really fascinating, and this talks about an enduring machlokas, an enduring disagreement, an enduring dispute. What's interesting, though, even though they had many of these disputes and they held fast to how they believed, although certain times, in certain cases, in certain situations, they would admit, they would, agree to the other side's opinion in certain cases, but most of the time they really hew to their opinions and their ways of approaching these topics. Nevertheless, we do have texts that talk about these students, the people who made up these academies or schools of thinking, that nevertheless they married with each other, they got together, even though they disagreed on a great many number of things. There were still some things that they were able to still be part of a community together, a community of rabbinic scholars. So that is something I want to return to. Okay, now the final line, Ezehi machloket she'enu l'shem shamayim. What is this type of disagreement that is not for the sake of heaven? Zo machloket korach v'chol araso. This is the disagreement that Korach and his assembly has with him. So what is this controversy? What is this disagreement that Korach and his assembly brought with him? Well, it's in the chapter 16 of the book of Numbers. It's actually for Parsha of Korach, which is, it happens. It's the very beginning of Parsha's Korach. And so what happened in chapter 16 of the book of Numbers with Korach and the hundreds of people who followed him? Well, it would seem to be that it was not. And well, certainly here it's being used as an example that is not for the sake of heaven. There it seemed to be more of, he was wondering how come Moses and Aaron get to have all this leadership? Shouldn't they take that up? God's not really part of that picture, it would seem. And that is why this is being positioned, that particular disagreement of Korach and his follower, his congregation, not being for the sake of heaven. It is interesting, though. Why would we want these disagreements to endure? So, to be honest, I don't really know. If you have ideas, I'd love to hear it. Curiously, with Korach and his congregation, if you will, his assembly, they argued, would we want that to endure? No. It would almost seem to be that worked out better for everyone, that they, first of all, got swallowed up by the earth, but then also their machloket did not endure. Their disagreement, the controversy, did not endure. Meanwhile, Hillel and Shammai, or more specifically, the academies of Hillel and Shammai, that's an interesting one. You know, we ideally would want there not to be controversy or disagreement about. They're usually what they disagree about were matters of Jewish practice. What's fascinating is, yeah, they had their disagreements endured, but ultimately people picked a side, and we usually go according to Beit Hillel. We usually go according to Hillel's academy with matters of Jewish practice. There are a small number of aspects of Jewish practice that we actually do follow the school of Shammai, but do we say that is a controversy that endures? It's unclear. But there it is for the sake of heaven, in contrast to Korach and his followers, because there everybody agreed they wanted what was best for the Jewish people in our service as a people to God. Versus Korach, it was more for self-aggrandizement. So that's what we got for controversies that endure, that should be. I think ultimately, I'm still bothered. I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm still bothered, just between you and me. I am still bothered by this aspect of it's clear the value position of this text very much values having disagreements for the sake of heaven. That's clear, a very clear moral stake here. But wanting them to endure, that to me strikes me as quite curious, and I don't really know how to process that. So if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear it. I'm still not quite sure how to process wanting differences and controversies and disagreements to endure. So that's strange to me, but clearly having disagreements for the sake of heaven, that is valorized here. So that's what we have for this text, and I want to thank you so much for watching.